Hello and welcome to Tech with Briley. Today we're going to be scaffolding a new open source project called Textbook Companion. The goal of this project is to be a large language model textbook companion. We will use some openly licensed textbooks and create a chat interface to chat with that textbook using a large language model such as Claude or ChatGPT. We'll likely need to work with document embeddings and like a recursive text splitter because these textbooks are very large, and we're going to put a content management in place. So it's going to be requiring a lot of interesting moving parts. So in order to facilitate the development and easy developer onboarding, I'm going to create a dev container in today's session, dev container setup. You can find this project at whatever state it's in on the source code link below at the bottom of this video. And I've got it locally, so let's say dev containers, initial dev container branch. So VS Code does make it easy to set up the dev containers configuration. We will add the configuration in this workspace so that I can commit it to GitHub. And these are by default going to offer some operating systems, Docker and Docker. And what we're going to do is show all definitions and look for Python. We're going to be running Python 3, but I believe we're going to be vectorizing documents, and we'll need a vector store. Now, SQLite is there's a SQLite extension for document embeddings, for vector search, that is. I don't know if it's going to be ready. It just had a 0.1 release like 2 days ago, which meant in that context of this project, at least, that it's a stable release. But I think we're going to use PostgreSQL, most likely. So I'll just go ahead and set this up. Another ingredient we're going to be using is called Langflow. And currently Langflow doesn't build well on Python 3.11. So I'm going to use Python 3.10. Bullseye, I guess, is or Bookworm. I'm not sure the difference between Bullseye and Bookworm. Bullseye and Bookworm, let's see. Is one of them Ubuntu, one of them Debian? They're recommending the Bullseye 3.11 by default, so I'll go with Bullseye 3.10, just because we know we have a constraint here. And let's see, we will need Git from source within the dev container. We may need a package manager, like Poetry or something. There's so many of these extensions. I don't know where you can find just the canonical list of these. Somehow it's able to pull them into the VS Code, but is there like a directory where I could browse these and find out what's going on? There's so many interesting dev containers extensions. So we'll just go right now with Git. That's the only one I know we'll need, because when we open the dev container, we're going to be in a GitHub repository, and Bullseye is such a slim distribution. Git's not really installed by default, to my understanding. Yeah, and there's also probably some interesting software worth checking out inside of here. Just look at that, a big list. All right. Okay, I think we're running a Debian distribution. We'll go with the default of that OS provided. All right, so it's going to create a dev container configuration here. And we have Docker Compose because we have a backing service, the Postgres, and a Docker file. And by default, it's JSON, but it's got all these comments in there, which actually is not valid JSON. And if we want to validate this or parse this, I have to remove all those comments. But we will need this post create command shortly. And I will want to change this. Instead of Postgres latest, we're going to use PG vector. And I think latest isn't a valid tag there. So I have to check the tags real quick. We have P16, PG15, all the versions of Postgres. We'll go with the latest at this time version of Postgres, but I can see why they don't just have a latest tag, because there could be breaking changes. They don't want to upgrade your database on you. So we'll use the latest, version of PG16 just by using this generic. I won't specify a subversion of that. So now that I made that change, I think we're ready to compile, to reopen in container now, and it'll build the whole container. So let's just test our initial configuration with the database. It's starting Docker. Docker is running. It'd be nice if I could give this a name. It just calls it VS Code by default. And so I don't really know when I view my volumes list and my images. The images are actually named appropriately, but the volume's not. So maybe I could change the volume mapping or something inside of the container. So it looks like textbook companion dev container is running, dev container app. So we're probably good to go. No errors. And let me just check our Docker compose if there's a way I can name this volume. That'd be maybe helpful. Postgres data. Well, not a big deal. It's just we might have a collision in my local volumes. Okay, so now another thing we're gonna want to do is configure some customizations here. We're gonna add some features, but first let's commit this. This is a good start. PG vector there. Now, this is going to be a Python project. So I'll go to the extensions and I'll add some local extensions. To the dev container. Add to dev container JSON right there. So now we can see customizations VS Code extension MS Python. We may, now I don't know if that includes this. Let's see, Python debugger. Yeah, it includes Pylance, Python debugger. All right. So I think that's a good start. I don't want to get too carried away. At this point in the project, we don't know exactly our dependencies. We're likely going to be working with Django and Wagtail. Like, we feel pretty certain about that. So at the very least, I can search for Django. Install in dev container. would like to help us with linting. So we're going to use this Astral Rough inside of the dev container. So now we can see in our dev container we have a Git feature installed and I see it didn't add it to the dev container JSON by default. Oh, it just added it to the dev container. Interesting. So I'll have to go back through there and I'll do that again. Python, Django actually. The reason I'm adding them to the dev container configuration is so that the next developer that comes along opens a dev container, everything's just ready for them. Now I also like GitHub Copilot. No, not everybody's using that, and it should be optional, but I don't know how to make it an extension optional. I'm trying to figure that out. So for now, I'm just going to add that as a top level theme. We wanted the Django IntelliSense. And Copilot. So I need to install here. And maybe the Copilot, and I use the chat a lot too. And maybe this one's been, yeah, it's been deprecated. VS Code speech extension instead. All right, so now we've got a few of these. I'll reopen our dev container and we'll watch what happens. Rebuild the container there. Not only does it handle system level, oops, I didn't save, darn it. It handles system level dependencies, but also your development environment. We'll overwrite that and we'll have to rebuild one more time. This is honestly one of the most difficult parts I've found in software development is getting the development environment set up. It doesn't matter if it's somebody like an intern brand new to development or even people, professional engineers in a large scale company. We're struggling with development environments. It's crazy. Lack of documentation, broken configurations, like tacit knowledge that's never been shared. You know, people who've suffered through the development environment setup and just didn't share that knowledge. They're just like, okay, now onto my task, which is understandable. Even just this setting up a Python virtual environment, installing packages, you know, activating the virtual environment, installing packages and running, and then doing that the next day you come back, it just throws people off, and it's not their fault. It's a pain of development, and I don't know if this will ever go away, but it's really frustrating to not only the person experiencing that, but as like a project lead and somebody who's trying to help coordinate people getting tasks, getting people to start, you know, working on their tasks and developing their skills and all that kind of stuff. Those are the actual goals. Getting bogged down with virtual environments, it's just a non-starter. We're not going to install these Flutter and Dart ones. It's a different project. But yeah, so it looks like we've got the development container running. So let's check our local installed. Did I forget? I got rough there. Local installed dev container. There we are. This is the ones that we want to check out. And I don't really care for the recommended ones. So we got rough installed, the Python debugger, and Python and Pylance, GitHub pull requests, GitHub Copilot chat. Oh, I forgot we added that. I'm going to make sure that comes in because we're going to be working on GitHub. Yes, lint. Why is this installed? What did this coming through? Weird. And why is AutoPep 8 keep getting installed? Uninstall that. Because it clashes with rough. Yes, which brings me to the other point. I need to configure rough as the default Python code linter. I think probably the Microsoft somehow AutoPep 8 or whatever is a transient dependency, and it's a little bit hard for me to tell based on this view what are the direct dependencies and what are the transient dependencies. I have to hop into here to see my direct dependencies, kind of. But here, AutoPep 8 comes back. So I don't know where that came from. And the Python only mentions the Python debugger. All right, so I'm going to just look at a previous repo though regarding linting and see how I've done that. I'm trying to remember what was the most recent one where I was able to get the linting set up. I think if I go to my repos, Wagtail vector blog, I think I did it here. If I look in the dev container, JSON, VS Code extensions and settings, here we are, editor, formatting on save. Just want to get this done. So we don't have to have the formatting wars. Extensions, comma, settings. Default formatter should be rough, format on save, true. Nice, clean, conventional code format. Now this is going to be a yellow squiggle for just a moment until the dependencies are installed. There it goes, and it went away. Great, so let's say what we did. Configure the extensions and settings. Commit. I'll publish the branch in a moment. So the last thing, without getting too complicated or eager, I'm going to put a couple of dependencies in there just so we have a requirements text file with basic, probably Django length, Wagtail and Langflow. I think we've already the team is already kind of committed to using those two tools. Now, it might be good to separate them out. I don't want to prematurely optimize this or try to think architecturally, but Langflow has a lot of dependencies. Wagtail has a lot of dependencies, and the ways we're going to be using those tools might be not so singular. They might be, in other words, split out into different services. So just for now, thinking of this whole project as a single service, just to get us prototyping. And we'll work out how to split them out later. So we'll open a new VS Code terminal, and we're gonna pip, let's see. Yeah, it's just really tricky. This whole virtual environment thing is a mess. It'd be nice if you change into a directory, or you open a directory in your VS Code, and that's it. You have all your dependencies. You don't have to like think about virtual environments. It'd be nice if that would just go away. So we're gonna install Wagtail. Actually, here's how I can do it. Greater than or equal to, what's the syntax here? I think they just made 6.2. But we don't want to update that. Is that correct? Or do you use a comma here? So now we're installing Langflow's dependencies, LangChain and all that stuff, but I'll just, in our requirements, define the top level dependencies. Admittedly, Poetry does offer a better experience here. And since we're working inside of a dev container, it might be okay to introduce Poetry to this project. The reason I haven't introduced it in other open source projects is because it adds yet another layer of complexity and another failure point for developers getting started out. Just installing Poetry to install your Python packages and is already a blocker. It's already hard enough to just install the Python packages with pip. And there's failure points there. So even though Poetry solves many failure points in use cases, it's another barrier to entry. Although it does take away the pip part of the package. So in a way, it replaces difficulties with other difficulties. And I'm not sure if it's a net gain because of the features Poetry brings. Maybe it is. But from the standpoint of a new developer, it's just the same. You're like, I can't get my development environment set up. It's the same struggle. Poetry won't install. What operating system are you running? Windows. Oh, okay. What was there? All these weird things. Now, Poetry pretty much does use PyProject HOML, which is nice in a standards compliant way. I'm waiting for UV, I think hopefully UV will be the unification of pip tools and pip. Fast, written in Rust. But I don't know if it's ready for production yet. Especially, they just added cross-platform lock file support. And you still have this step. Which is as simple as it sounds, is a killer. So I'm going to add this to the README though. And you still have this step, right? You have not only to install Python, but you have to install UV. And there's different installations based on your operating system, of course. And then, well, mainly, if only Windows could kind of unify with the Linux. And I know they now have Windows subsystem for Linux, so that's actually a really good development. I just recommend any person on Windows just start working in WSL. The developer experience is just a lot better. And I think Microsoft knows that the Windows developer experience, if you're doing like not Microsoft-y framework stuff, is very painful. And even activating this step right here, there's like weird permissions issues that people will encounter, and they're very opaque, even from somebody who's worked with computers for a while. And I've seen my fair share of weird and opaque errors in Linux and shell environments. It's just we shouldn't expect our developers to have that intimate of knowledge of operating system fundamentals. And I know that the default is there for security, but somehow it just works on Linux and Mac, and why the Windows has to have that extra security precaution built in that you can't run scripts. You can't run an activate script. It's kind of baffling. All right. So the question is, should we experiment with UV? And this is coming back. I'd like to see a canonical list of those features. Let's see. Configure container features, though I can do it this way. So that's cool. UV is a UV one. An extremely fast Python package installer and resolver written in Rust. So we can get it right in the environment there, which is pretty cool. Editable installs, git dependencies, direct URL dependencies. Does it make it easy to upgrade? At this point, I don't have enough confidence in UV. I know I can get back here to add that. I've never actually used UV. I'm not going to add it to this project. It would be silly. Poetry, though, on the other hand, maybe. But I think at this point, we're all right with just the requirements like this. So let's just do this. And now that we've got a local requirement to text, then I can say in our devcontainer JSON, we can run a command to install those. That way the developer doesn't have to worry about that. It's just kind of done for them. Until they need to install their own dependency, then it's another question. But here we go. Post create command. We'll uncomment this. There we go. Oh, no. Wait. What the heck did I do? There we go. And I need a comma right here. We've already got features. We may or may not need to forward ports. So let's rebuild this and see that it installs. Oops, and I didn't actually. This is one problem with JSON. There's the trailing comma. You can't have a trailing comma. I hope, man, it's just such an oversight. It's such a common thing to have a trailing comma. And comments. I hope they can upgrade the, it has to be backwards compatibility, so I know this is probably a lost cause, but upgrade the JSON spec so you can have comments and trailing commas. Come on. Let's go get that usability. Think from the user perspective first. I know there's engineering trade-offs and concerns, but I think sometimes those engineering trade-offs and decisions are harmful to the user experience, and really we need to go the extra mile and make it, the user experience, the priority, in this case the developer experience. So yes, that's a good sign. Now we're installing the dependencies. As soon as the dev container starts up, it installs in parallel the VS Code extensions, as well as the inside of the dev container environment, the operating system features that were defined there. Operating system Git, as well as a Python dependency. So your whole environment, from operating system to IDE to your project dependencies, everything is just there. All you have to do is open your development environment. This is like what I'm talking about. Caveat emptor, only right now VS Code, to my knowledge, has good support for dev containers, even though it's an open standard. I hope other IDEs like PyCharm will adopt this spec, and you would just have a parallel customizations dictionary here for PyCharm. So it's cool. It's vendor neutral standard for reusable development environments. It's good stuff. Okay, so at this point, I think we've got a good dev container set up. We've got the great, we've got the project set up with an initial repository and license. Wait a minute. Okay. So I haven't committed from this. This is one thing. I can't remember how I resolved this before. But essentially we need to tell, we're inside of a operating system, in a Docker container, so it doesn't know my Git credentials. And by default, I think it should just use my credentials from the parent environment, but it's not sharing them into there, so I can't commit. So this is a blocker. We're going to need to be able to commit in the dev container. So what have I done to resolve this before? That's the weird thing, because I don't have anything in here and I'm able to commit. So let me try just rebuilding the container just to see if my, okay, so here's maybe part of the problem. What's the problem? Removal of containers already in progress. So yeah, let me just also just delete this stuff. Delete these comments. Oh yeah, one last thing we're going to do is add a README. Modify the README. I'll have to think about that, but let's try rebuilding this trailing new line. I guess not. All right. So we will reopen in container. Hey, welcome to the channel. How are y'all doing today? Anyone's doing any Python web development or AI application development? That's the goal of this project. We're going to be working with some technologies I've been working with previously called Wagtail Content Management System and some vector embedding providers like OpenAI to store vectorized versions of articles, or in this case, a textbook, and allow the user to chat with the textbook. So we have this textbook companion project I'm working on right now. We've got some plans and an initial project charter, and I'm setting up the development environment so that we can collaborate on this in upcoming live streams, for example. So VS Code dev container get credentials. Sharing credentials with your container doesn't work. Why doesn't that work? Hopefully it's not too confusing. So we have our local environment, which has our VS Code running and some source code. Then it mounts the source code and exposes the port to the whole internal container environment. So you can have a local quality development environment, including your full IntelliSense completions, code navigation, and debugging. All right, so this is the developing inside of a container document, but I need just the get credentials. Maybe they think it's a solved problem. Working with Git. If you're working with the same repository both locally and Windows inside of a container, be sure to set up consistent line endings. If you clone Git using a credential manager, your container should already have access to your credentials. If you use SSH keys, you can opt into sharing them, sharing Git credentials. So I used the Git. If you use HTTPS to clone your credentials on your local OS, no further setup is required. Credentials you've entered locally will be ensured. Oh, hey, welcome, Werder. You're working on some C# and looking for some software development. But yeah, checking out Python soon. Very cool. Today I'm working on setting the groundwork for an open source project we're going to be developing called Textbook Companion, written in Python. We're going to use large language models or generative AI to interact with an open source textbook for high school or college level studies. This can be mathematics, physics, nursing, biology, physiology. There's a bunch of these subjects, and the textbook, as you probably know, books are written in one way and from one perspective, and they're not always easy to understand. And if you have a question while you're studying your textbook, like, how do you get an answer? How do you get clarification if, like, your teacher's not there and you're studying at home? So we're taking an idea that's out there of these kind of chat with PDF, chat with book, and making our own project to learn how this works and integrate with an existing open source textbook community called OpenStax. This is our goal, is we're aiming towards OpenStax. Now, whether or not we will successfully integrate with OpenStax or contribute that to this broader initiative is, another question. But we've looked at the sort of the ingredients of OpenStax, and we're using the same ingredients, and their textbooks are freely available, so we can just do this anyway without, necessarily any support from OpenStax. They've just published all these sociology, anatomy, physiology, psychology, all these textbooks from different topics. freely available online. And just right now, the website, you can read the book online, for example, but you can't chat with it. There's other features like highlighting and things like that. You have to log in for that. And so we would like to add a chat interface to this or a similar site. That's what we're building. Yeah, in any case, we're checking out this OpenStax if you're interested in what's called open access education or open educational resources, OER. Okay, so I have to double check again, but I don't think my Git credentials have are mapped to this container because I didn't use the HTTP when I cloned it. Let's try. It did work. Okay, something I just needed to rebuild the container. All right, it should just work, and it did. I'm glad for that. So right now we're just going to create a pull request. I'm going to need to update the README. Thinking from a developer's perspective, we'll create a draft pull request. And notice that it was really helpful. It wrote the pull request for me. Whoops. Add devcontainer and project dependencies. This pull request adds devcontainer configuration with the necessary settings for Python 3 and PostgreSQL. It includes a Docker file and Docker Compose YAML for building and running the application. Additionally, the project dependencies are specified in the requirements text file. The pull request enables developers to easily set up their development environment and ensures that all of the necessary dependencies are installed. I didn't write that, but that's exactly what we're doing, and that's the why. It also included the why. This is good. Pull request description. Now we're going to update this README just a bit. I don't know that there's much, since we've got this development dev container set up. Whoops. We might not need a lot of specific instructions. Textbook companion. Let's see. This actually goes here in the README. Let's see how far we can get with overview. This project is a large language model that can be used to generate textbook style content. The model is trained on a large corpus of textbooks and can be used to generate content that is similar in the style of the textbook of the corpus. That's not true. Yeah, sometimes I add comments to the code, for example. This project will allow students with a large language model to help them understand the content of a textbook. The model will be able to answer questions about the textbook, provide summaries of the textbook, and generate questions about the textbook. Teachers the model for lesson planning, to generate quizzes, and to provide additional resources for students. So we're realizing there's two key stakeholders in this, teachers and students, right? Maybe parents as well, but parents are kind of in the teacher role, perhaps. Parents can use the model to help their children with homework and provide additional resources for their children. That's good. Those are the main stakeholders I can think of. Excellent. So that's that. Contributing, installing. Oops, I keep opening the wrong file. Yeah, do you use comments in your code often, or what's your philosophy of commenting? We do it to provide a ready-made development environment. So hopefully it's just a 3-step, process. We can't get rid of Git. That's always going to be a thing. Don't know if I considered it, but Copilot read all the files, and then you can use that as content. And like now you're writing documentation, it'll know better and how to suggest it. In order to do that, you can add notes or simple descriptions at the end of the file for it. Documentation for the most practice. Yeah. Help smooth out the sharp edges of the development process. There's always going to be sharp edges and pain points in development, unfortunately. That doesn't go away. That's one of the main, I think, lessons of it as a developer you learn is just you have to be able to abide in discomfort and frustration and just keep going, ask for help, give help when asked, but keep going. We're faced with stuff we don't know the answer to every day. We're learning every day. Yeah, and so I really encourage people I'm working with, especially new developers, just to kind of get comfortable with not knowing and not have this idea we have to know it all before we can start doing, or that I have to learn something else before I can start doing. Just start doing today. Yeah, and realize, I already know enough that I can start, and there's stuff that I don't know that I will encounter, and I'll have to know it. But that's the best time to learn, is when I need it. All right, I think this is a good start for, I don't want to get too carried away, but I do want to provide basic documentation. Overview and a contributing guide, I think, is pretty good for starters. Cool. So what kind of projects are you working on? With C#, are you in game development? I'm just reading back, so I thought you're 30, but a 10-year dev. C# is your C#, JS, and TS. Okay, so also web dev, probably some web development there. Hate spending time writing documentation, but it's the best way to save time and helping others build a better software. Yeah, that's true. We neglect that, and then we're actually hurting ourselves as well as our teammates. And it's a delicate balance, though, right? Because if we spend too much time developing, we're not actually maybe kind of delivering, and the documenting, and the documentation also, it becomes something we need to maintain because it goes out of sync very easily. It's a bit brittle. Have you ever used like the Diataxis documentation framework? I'm curious about this. I haven't applied it, but I think the Wagtail project, which we're going to be working with, they use this Diataxis systematic approach to technical documentation and authoring. By the way, we're using Wagtail CMS, and I'm not going to be working with Wagtail in this session, but we will be opening another branch very soon. That's why I've got it in our dependencies here, just to get our requirements here, get that out of the way. And essentially, it's a content management system. It's heavily inspired by WordPress, but it's built with Python and Django. The user experience is really excellent, and they have a very high focus on usability, accessibility. The developer experience is also excellent, being built on a mature framework and foundation like Django with a robust language ecosystem like Python. And then just attention to, writing idiomatic code and defining good software architecture, I think, and having excellent documentation, which is as we're noticing, is essential. It's what makes the Wagtail developer experience so enjoyable. I've been working with Wagtail for about 6 years and just really can't say enough about this project. It's great community. How do we get to the docs? So if you just Wagtail and Gitpod, interesting. So from the Wagtail site, about resources, developer documentation, I guess that's the main way. So it's pretty well organized. And then they use this diataxis framework. They have tutorials, user's guide, advanced topical guides, as well as references. So they sort of divide it up. And of course, it's a work in progress. Yeah, it's worth checking out, especially if you want to kind of pivot over into like Django web development, because Wagtail being built on top of Django, everything you need to do, you can dive down to the layer of Django if you need, but Wagtail abstracts away some of the concepts in Django, like routing and views. In a way, it sort of combines those into what they call pages. And if you need to use the Django router to define URLs, and you can define views as well, class-based or function-based views, but you can get quite far just with Wagtail, especially if your project is oriented around, writing, collaborating on, and publishing content, like a blog or a news site or common websites. Hence, it's a content management system, which isn't the right tool for every project, of course. But a surprising number of projects are essentially CRUD apps, and Django handles those well. And if you have very content-oriented website like a textbook publication platform, content management system makes a lot of sense. Bad thing, tried most part of companies, bad documentation practices. And so you've enhanced the documentation, that's good. Yeah, it's hard to get the whole team, for example, on board with the documentation, or get support from the management, I would suppose, for a global initiative like that. So I didn't actually end up needing to do this. This just worked. I just needed to rebuild. So at this point, I think we got a good pull request, and it's been about 1 hour. I'll mark this as ready for review. Again, you can check out this project on GitHub, Tech Ventures Dev and Textbook Companion. The next step is going to be, I'll create a project, like a GitHub project probably, at the organization level. We'll make it public. All of the work we're going to do, it's going to be public and open source. This is a learning project first and foremost. So we're not making any promises this will be useful or integrated with any other projects beyond our scope. We don't have really any say in how the OpenStax project, for example, is governed, or the Wagtail CMS. But we're going to build this textbook companion step by step over the coming months probably, and using these technologies like pgvector, document embeddings, probably a large language model like ChatGPT or Anthropic Claude. I'm a big fan of Claude, not only to integrate into this project, but to actually write the code. We'll show how that works. I'm going to try, probably in this project, I think it's called IDER chat. We're going to try this one and see how it helps with Django and Wagtail development. It's heavily oriented towards Python. It's very good at writing Python, so it seems like a great coding companion. And you can use Anthropic Claude as your large language model provider, and Claude is extremely good at writing code. And as can be seen on videos on my channel, where I've been doing live streams with Claude, writing 80 to 90% of the code for me without even needing much modification, just review and running and testing and guidance. So I can step back and think from a project management and user perspective what we're trying to develop, explain that, articulate that to Claude, and it can generate some pretty sophisticated code that would take me quite a long time in a lot of cases to work with. And in language other than Python, it's writing Dart and Flutter, so which I'm not very familiar with, but I really like the Dart language. Yeah, it's kind of like HR. It's like you could think of yourself as like a senior developer in a way. You have to know about the language, about the project. So you have to have the context of a senior developer to guide the model. But at the same point, the code that it writes is very sophisticated at times. And even, like I say, I'm not really experienced with Dart, but even Python, which I've been working with for a longer time, I'm not like super deep into my knowledge of the the complexity and diversity of the Python. Even standard library, for example, or the language, some idiomatics, it's not perfect. And with new language releases, it doesn't pick up on the latest features or idioms and conventions. So it needs some guidance and other supportive tools. But like I say, it's 80 to 90% there. And I suppose it would support fairly well TypeScript, JavaScript, C#. Although, caveat emptor, JavaScript ecosystem, TypeScript, is notorious for churn. And so I'm already fighting a little bit of battles with wagtail upgrades and the code that like Anthropic Claude will generate, maybe not using the latest wagtail features or something like that. I would really be frightened of what it would generate in a React code base, where 6 months ago React is like a whole nother generation. Saying that kind of tongue in cheek, but I think they've done that. They've gone through several major iterations of what is a conventional React application. So I don't know if the large language models could really keep up with that. They're training on public data, Stack Overflow, documentation, and they don't have the sensibilities that a human does. That there's no even some of the code they'll generate in the same file. It'll write duplicate code in the same file, or just make weird duplications that a human would have just noticed right away. The person writing the code would not have written the same function twice, most likely, depending on the size and complexity of the file. But this is like literally in the same file where I've had this happen. Big code bases, you could be blamed for copy pasta and having the same code twice. So it makes some of the same mistakes as humans. Anyway, it's quite an interesting exploratory process to see the capabilities of these large language models, how they can integrate into my development process, and maybe learn from other people. What's your experience with using large language models as pair programmers, for example? Do they replace us? Do they free us up in some contexts to think at a different level? And similar to pair programming, in a way, one person can be freed from the syntax and semantics level of thinking and think from a more feature and purpose-oriented perspective. So I think I'll call it good here and take a quick break, come back a little bit later in the afternoon, start some more project management tasks. We'll use, I think, Anthropic Claude to set up a basic project backlog, and we'll set up a project here on GitHub under our Tech Ventures organization. That's Clued, IntelliSense. Yeah, you need good IDE tooling. That's really helpful, isn't it? Although ChatGPT does execute Python code. It does evaluate and execute Python code. And so you can actually have it run Python code to generate charts. Like, it can use a plotting library and take some data that you give it and generate a chart with that. Anthropic Claude doesn't currently execute code, but I think they are planning that feature. And if we use something locally like IDER, I don't really so much need it to execute the code if I can just have the changes locally and I can run the project quickly. But that's an interesting observation. Yeah, it's like ChatGPT. I think it should be in their documentation, but running Python inside ChatGPT. ChatGPT knows Python. I haven't done it lately, but I've definitely used it to plot things, and it's like literally had to have used matplotlib or whatever to produce the output. Like, it couldn't have, whereas Anthropic Claude, it can generate SVG charts, and they're not really that great, and it's not going to be actually your data, but unless they've taken that feature out also. But I think I can look back at my live stream at least has had some examples of it generating code. Let's see. Yeah, I don't want to hop into it. Yeah, I definitely think pay for tools. Buy, I know money's challenging and it's not, it's a personal thing, but I think the time and expertise, the time that Anthropic, for example, and ChatGPT have saved me writing code, and the expertise they've lent in some really complicated problems in my development process, open source, and at work, are worth the subscription fee. And a lot of companies are even recognizing this, knowing that they're not silver bullets, and there are some trade-offs. You can become overly reliant on them, for example, and maybe turn off your brain and not, think about the problems critically. But I think if you can maintain awareness and not lean too heavily on it, I think the benefits outweigh the costs so far in my direct experience. So definitely treat yourself to that if it's feasible. Pay for tools. We have this fixation on free. It should be free, always free. But yeah, pay a little bit. There's a cost regardless. The cost is often quality. If I relegate myself to only things that are free to use, or the free tiers of things, I'm losing in quality. So yeah, pay a little bit. This in particular, if you're a developer, will pay you back in dividends. Just if you measure your time that it would take you to complete a task versus the support you get, assign yourself an hourly wage, right? That's a thought experiment. Say my time is worth X per hour, and this month, ChatGPT or Claude help me with complex tasks that probably save me 10, 20, 30 hours of reading documentation, troubleshooting, scratching my head. It's hard to estimate, but it's pretty quick to get to the point where you exceed the subscription cost in just one programming session. I've been able to deliver projects in a weekend that would have probably otherwise taken me weeks, just due to not being able to write Flutter and Dart code at the level that this model can generate readily. Of CPT. Ability of AI to learn. They have, this is right. That's why we're using this this retrieval augmented generation, so that even if they haven't read a particular document or documentation, we can feed them the right answers. And I'll do this in the context of Wagtail or other CMSs that publish new versions, and that wasn't in the training corpus for the older version of Wagtail. And yeah, definitely specifying the version does help the AI to generate better results, particularly if it's been trained on that version of the software. That's a great suggestion. Like I can say, I need to write, I'm using Python 3.12, let's use this new annotation or something like that. It can help me with. But in cases like Wagtail released Wagtail 6.2 like yesterday or 2 days ago, it's not going to have that in its corpus, so we'll use retrieval augmented generation. Similarly, it may have these textbooks in the corpus, but it also has so much other knowledge there embedded in that latent space, it's not going to draw directly from the textbook. So we're going to use, again, retrieval augmented generation in this textbook companion project. Same idea, same concept, can be applied in many ways. Yeah, that's right. And the feature, I think, for the evaluation of code is premium. Let me double check. Let's see if we can. And now that it's 4.0 now, the Omni. Please evaluate the output of that function. Yeah, and they could have nerfed this feature because I think it was pretty rife for abuse, I'm pretty sure. But I am almost positive, very confident that I have used ChatGPT 4.0, ChatGPT 4, their legacy model now, to generate and evaluate Python. You know, and I think it could be something like this. I can say, please create a Python function to calculate the Fibonacci, and I could just kind of evaluate this up to. Let's see if that works. So now it's analyzing. There it goes right here. It's running the code. It's evaluating the code. Here are the first 32 digits. So it used a tool, and you can see the REPL here. You can see that it ran analysis in the analysis tool usage. It used the function and evaluated it to 32 and got a result. Pretty cool. So that's, yeah, it's good to know. It takes a little bit of prompting. Maybe that's why it's not so kind of obvious that it's capable of doing that. And I can't remember what the exact task I was working on, but some data visualization task. Maybe writing a feature. Gosh, it's been so long. Or I think I had a demo spreadsheet that I was, a friend of mine, a couple of friends of mine are wanting to learn data analysis. So I was showing them how it could be used to generate matplotlib plots, or, you know, JavaScript has a few plotting libraries there as well. You want to run that code. Yeah, so that's a, I think, useful feature. But if I said, generate this to 3,000, you know, that could put some load on their server. And there's, you know, or cryptocurrency mining, who knows, I don't know, but they still have it in ChatGPT 4. Maybe the Omni model doesn't have. Hear about the LLM accuracy limitations, like GPT to give us 10 sentences that have any specific word at the end. Okay, yeah, so it did evaluate that using code. So 4.0 Omni can be used for that. Okay, so let's say ChatGPT, give me 10. Whoop, G. I'm going to use this, and I'm going to check out Claude also. Please give me 10 sentences that end with the word banana. Ah, cereal. Pretty close, 9 out of 10. Banana, 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 banana. Nice. Banana. Okay. So yeah, and is it, so when we say limit, is this like a fundamental limit, like a mathematical limit, like there's a curve and it cannot exceed accuracy of a certain limit? Or is it a limit like, yeah, they are non-deterministic and there will be some non-determinism and they will not always behave deterministically, or they will not always generate output that we request? You know, and this also, by the way, is a human characteristic. Although a human would probably be able to follow this instruction pretty good, they might be prone to not. 3.5 and 4 can't. So 4 Omni. Let's try their legacy model. Here's 4, their legacy model. Okay. In the corner. Ah, yeah, we have a banana and then cereal, number 2. Banana, cereal, banana, 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 banana. Pretty close though. It's on par with Claude here. Interesting. And for whatever reason, I can't do the 3.5 here anymore. So. It's a black box split. The instructions and evaluate each time with different. They're non-deterministic. Yeah, right. It's like Schrodinger's box or whatever. It'll give you different output each time, which is another way we have to change as our when we start to understand how these models behave. we can then know how to use them and what their strengths and weaknesses are, right? The characteristics of how they. Fruit bowl, snack, banana. So it didn't quite get it there. That's interesting. So yeah, there's like an accuracy like limit, but if I keep running this, is probably at one point, one of the iterations, it will give me 10 that have it, that did succeed. Just like here, only one was wrong. Here we had 2 errors. If I keep running it, I'm pretty confident I would at least get one case. So there would be some distribution of, we could evaluate this 100 times and get the number of errors for each time, and there would be a distribution of errors. So we have to start thinking statistically and probabilistically, because these are inherently probabilistic and non-deterministic. That's all. And this is a mindset that, regardless of whether we're using large language models, it's a difficult one. We tend to think in extremes, binaries, black and white thinking. That's kind of more, for some reason, natural. We have to maybe intentionally think in distributions. Particularly, one place this comes up as engineers, in problem estimation and estimating, the severity, or whether or not an issue should be taking the top priority compared to other issues. We just think this happened once, thus it's an issue. So, but it's not really black and white like that. If this happened once out of 10,000 times, is it really an issue? Is it an issue that's high priority? Is it an urgent issue? Can we think less black and white? But like a lot of times our stakeholders will come to us and say, I observed this one time, and in their mind, it is like the issue. That's what we need to work on, or whatever. But if we can step back and help think more holistically, what about compared to this issue that's happening 8,000 times out of 10,000 times, or that's having this kind of impact? What's the impact of that issue as well? So these are interesting heuristics and mindset we can approach our work, and especially our work with large language models. Memory storage for instructions. Yeah, we'll get into this as well with the LangFlow, but there is a a memory component in LangFlow. So if I come over here and run LangFlow, and then open in browser. Shoot. So hopefully this won't be too problematic. It's another problem with the dang Debian distribution. They lag so far behind. I've stopped using Debian. It's just too far lagging behind. They say it's for security, but no, it's actually harmful. That looks correct to me. Let's try rebuilding it. For a long time, I ran Debian just as my main operating system. Ubuntu, I think, strikes the right balance. I was running Debian because I was running like Trillion Linux or something like that. Is that even a thing still? No. Trillion's something else. What was the name of that? Trillion I am, though. I did use Trillion for a while. Wow, I forgot all about that. What about distros based on Arch? I could run Arch. I never have. I remember I went to Evergreen University and they had their whole, one in the computer lab at least, was all Arch. And I think in a way, yeah, it's good, but it's a bit elitist. And I'm back to this idea of user experience and developer experience. And I think Arch is like superpower, from what I understand of it, and it's super bleeding edge rolling release, but the user experience I think is just really suffers, especially when I don't really want to be an Arch person. I just want to do my things. In fact, I stopped even being an Ubuntu person. I just want to develop. I just want to use tools and get like focus on what it is I'm doing. Making music, for example, is a big one that I just couldn't do on Linux. No matter how I tried, for like 10 years, it just didn't work. Manjaro, yeah, maybe Manjaro puts the focus there. Back on the user experience and being simple and intuitive. It's using, what's that windowing system? Oh, it's using KDE, and I really like KDE. Accessible for a greater audience, exactly. Just put the focus there. That sounds good. I could get on board with that. I'm not really going to go back to Linux, though. It's as much as I was able to do as a software engineer and developer on Linux. That ship has sailed. I tried, and I've used Linux pretty extensively since around when I first started toying with it around 2005, and it became my main driver shortly thereafter. I had to break away from Windows a little bit. Had to play less video games. It was one of the main things that was finally enabled me to, reduce my dependency on Windows. Although we've been playing some games lately with my son. We're enjoying some cooperative games and online. I'm not anti-gamer, but that was certainly, the gaming ecosystem was one thing that wasn't there for Linux, and still struggling a little bit. But now, like, Steam has a great initiative for that. But yeah, Manjaro looks pretty nice. Yeah, and it's so rolling release, enterprise grade, and KDE is really just such a nice and usable and customizable window manager. And more, I think KDE is more than a desktop environment, right? It includes packages and GNOME is more probably. They include like software and things like that. So is this Manjaro your daily driver, or what are you using? Yeah, it's cool. Does it show me what it includes? Like, if I go to the KDE website at least. Plasma. It's just elegant. I really like KDE. Wow, it's actually been improved and made some changes since I've last used it. I have a Linux computer in my closet now. It was running here. It was sitting in my living room, and I would kind of swap back and forth between that. But I use it so infrequently now. And I don't want to have a bunch of computers. I just want one computer, to be honest. And a laptop is what I'm at. I had a Linux workstation. Okay, so having to add at least the build step for compiling SQLite does seem to have add a little bit of overhead, and it's taking a longer time for this development container to get set up. But now we're just installing Python dependencies, so that's at least a good sign. And again, Langflow and Wagtail have different dependencies, and Langflow seems to have a lot more. Wait, what is this doing? Getting wheels. Okay, yeah. Man. So I will eventually take this project and we'll split it into two projects, I think, one for Langflow and one for Wagtail, because eventually they'll probably run, or at least two separate services. I don't know. They'll run on different services, though, and you can do that with Docker Compose. Here we'll have a app service for the Wagtail part, and maybe a Langflow service that can just run the Langflow pre-built container, and we'll just pass in our flow there and serve it up, I think. YAML can have comments. Windows, Mac, Manjaro, and Kubuntu, main OS. Yeah, that was the one I was running for about the last 10 years. I was running Kubuntu. It was so good. Mac and Windows for work, Kubuntu and Manjaro for personal. Yeah, and now I've just combined all my work is on my work issued laptop. I just don't even put very much personal stuff there. and my personal is on my personal laptop. And that's that. That's how I've divided them. All right, looks like we're set up. Now let's try length run. I'll just show you this memory, the conversational memory. Now that we have SQLite, we shouldn't get any kind of errors. About ChromaDB. Okay, that didn't work. Anyway, let's just check this out. I'll fix this ChromaDB thing later. Well, I think I'll have to switch to an Ubuntu-based distribution so we can have PPA support. I got a crick in my neck. Crick in my neck. And the problem was I need 3.10 and an Ubuntu version. I can't remember how I resolved this problem. I can probably look. Let me just show you this in length flow memory thing. This is actually a really great project. Oh, now they have new hierarchical task agent. This is going to be so good. But here's a memory chatbot ready made. This is going to be so good. It essentially lets you have a visual programming environment for LLM apps. It's a cool, very cool tool. And this is the level of visual programming, I think that makes sense, where you have heavy abstractions that is naturally a data flow paradigm. Not a lot of imperative logic, a little bit maybe a looping imperative logic, but not like you're not trying to put just Python syntax into a graph-based UI. That doesn't work. I think there have been some attempts at that. I'm not going to run this because I don't have my LLM keys and it's kind of off, out of scope for this particular session today. Okay, hey, that would be great. We'll gladly accept pull requests. Let me enable the discussions on this one. And that way, if you want to stop by and introduce yourself, and we can say hi, and I can introduce you to my colleague. We're working on this open source, fully open source project. It's a learning adventure for both of us, and we think it's a project with a good purpose. And I've sort of articulated that purpose in the README for the current pull request. And my kind of colleague Jibril right now is working on you call it a project charter that's going to give a little bit more details about the scope, what we're trying to achieve, who our stakeholders are, their user personas is another document he'll be doing, as well as a bit of the technical architecture and justification for the tools and how they'll integrate, and long-term goals like being able to being oriented towards open stacks, but open to other uses of this idea. We know it's not our own idea, it's not unique to us, but we want to learn how these parts work, by building something. So yeah, basically LangFlow gives you these graphs. One of graph nodes, we call them components. There's different components for interacting with chat, interacting with text, composing prompts that can be sent to the large language model, combining the user input as well as some instructions for large language model or retrieval augmented generation results, or results of responses from other models. Is graph based, so you can have models talking to models, or agents they're starting to call those. You can grab data from different sources like API requests, files, URLs. It has a basic web scraper built in there, so it's a great way of pulling in the latest documentation for the library you're working with and having a chat agent with OpenAI on the latest document of React Router or whatever it is, that the chat or ChatGPT might not have been trained on, might be out of its corpus, the latest release of something. So that's a cool example. And it's not just ChatGPT, you can use other model providers, which is nice. So the whole graph, if you say, okay, well, let's try this with a different model, you just replace one node, but everything else stays valid. Like the whole graph is modular, so you can compose it in different ways. And document embeddings, vector storage, which one of those that was complaining was the ChromaDB, which needs SQLite, the latest version of SQLite. And we're going to be using PG Vector. So it's a very powerful visual scripting tool for large language model apps. That's why we're using it in this project. But yeah, we can see here an example of a composite prompt that can take context and the user message. And this context comes from the chat memory right here. So you can see the context right here coming in from the memory messages out when I haven't chatted with it. Oh, it's cool. No worries. You know, and there's not just one language, one English language. I mean to say. So even then, I'm used to recognizing that even within the United States, for example, there's different dialects of English. You know, then there's British and American English, which can be quite different. And English is such a universal language, like a universal second language, I think, or auxiliary language we could call it. That there's no one right way, so there's no apologies necessary. Is the main purpose of language is that we can understand each other, and that's all that matters. And I can understand you just fine, and I hope that you're able to understand me. I'm not talking too fast or something like that. I think it's good that we have an auxiliary language, whether it's English or something else, you know, is another matter. It just happens to be English. But yeah, so this is generally lang flow. All right, well, I'm going to take a break for today. It's been a good session, and I'm not going to fuss too much with this SQLite thing during this session. I'll fix that later, but we're not going to be using ChromaDB. Most likely we'll be using an embedding provider online. We're not making too many decisions at this juncture. We just want to get this pull request and project started. Pull request merged and project started. So we're going to merge that and delete that branch. And I think I had added this SQLite there and I didn't commit that because it didn't fix the problem. So I'll revert that. But now our project documentation is a little bit more complete. You get an idea of the key stakeholders and how to contribute. And the link does work. All right. But hey, yeah, nice to meet you. Warrior, like warrior. Okay. How do you spell it? How do you pronounce that? Warrior. Nice. Well, yeah, it was nice chatting with you. We are organisms. Nice. That's true. That's important to remind ourselves. We are human. We are fallible. We're not perfect. We're going to make mistakes. You know, and be graceful towards ourselves. Be graceful towards others. We are organisms. Okay. Interesting. All right. So we are organisms. We are organisms. Okay, cool. And it somehow got abbreviated. I'll try to remember that. That's a good philosophy, I guess. All right. Well, thanks for your time. It's been nice chatting with you. Hope to see you around. Have a great day.